Hey guys, CJ here, and I'm back with another character bio. This time it is Doctor Strange, the Sorcerer Supreme, generally considered the most powerful magic user on Earth. And so I guess before we get started, I just want to say, well, one, I really hope you like the new design. Josh worked really hard on it. I think it's really cool. I think it's also just a good indication of where we're going with the design for this. But for the most part, I just love this pattern, like in the background of the blocks. But just to address, character bios, I kind of took a little break. It was more like a personal leave from character bios because since Josh had been on his hiatus, I had been the primary guy for editing, the primary guy for uploading, and then trying to create all the OC and keep that going on top of it really burned me out. And so Villains Month especially just kind of was the tipping point in just completely burning me out as far as character bios go, because it got to the point where I was, to make up for time, I was doing one like every day. I would record one and get everything set, and I just I wasn't able to find the time, especially with the end of this college semester. So I'm very glad that Josh is back. Is essentially the brief TLDR version of that, because he is helping me out there. Anyway, so Doctor Strange, one of my favorite characters, actually. I think I've said that. I say that to anyone who really asks me, who are your favorite characters? Doctor Strange is on that list. He's really cool. He's got probably, I think, one of the best story arcs in comics, in that he was never always a goody two-shoes. He was actually kind of a jackass, so we'll get into that. Stephen Strange was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He has a sister and a brother, Donna and Victor. And there are a couple things like in his life that kind of point to that's why he wants to go into medicine. And the first is when his sister was 11 years old, he helped her with her injury. She got injured, and it sparked his interest in medicine. He was like, hey, I can do that. I guess 11 is a time when a lot of kids start thinking about what they want to do. But Stephen, he ended up going to New York College for medicine to become a neurosurgeon. And while his sister Donna was on a family vacation, she suffered a cramp, and that caused her to drown while swimming. And his mother also later died, and this essentially kind of crushed him spiritually. I think a big part of it was that, there was nothing he could do to save her. There was nothing. It just happened by chance, and that's kind of how life is, and he didn't react well to it, and so he became very heartless as a physician. Not like he was just slicing people open left and right and be like, some sort of Dr. Death, but he was he was all about the money. He pushed his loved ones away. All he cared about was his work and his money. He essentially shut himself off. As I mentioned, his mother died, and so he just focused on medicine, and it did. I mean, it paid off. He was very successful. He was considered, one of the top surgeons in America, maybe the top surgeon in America, and he was very successful and wealthy at New York Hospital. And as I mentioned, his wealth was his focus. He pushed away his loved ones. He kind of didn't, really have any loved ones after that. It was sort of like an early Tony Stark situation, like where he's just an asshole and all about business and stuff like that, and just doesn't care about anyone else. And so at the high point of his career, just as he was really hitting his stride, he was, as I mentioned, probably the top surgeon in America. He got into a car crash, and though he survived the crash, he had a lot of neurological damage, and that caused him to kind of lose, it damaged his hands. I don't know specifically if it was like he lost feeling, or what, but that essentially, hands are a big part of being a surgeon. You got to have steady hands, you got to have good dexterity and control over your hands, and so he lost his job, of course, and he spent the rest of his wealth that he had worked so hard to accumulate on finding any treatment, any possible treatment, and he soon went completely broke. He traveled around the world to try and find it, to no avail. This, however, was not the end of his quest, as he became more desperate than ever, and he turned to rumors rather than science. There was no scientific cure. These rumors led him to the Ancient One in Tibet, and he spent years in his training and mentorship, and he was groomed to be the next Sorcerer Supreme. The Ancient One had another apprentice, who some might know as Baron Mordo. And Mordo was one of Strange's biggest rivals in the beginning. They were both sort of rival students. And I guess Strange kind of came in and became the golden boy, and Mordo was jealous, and so he ended up storming off and leaving, and became, of course, one of his great nemesis. So in the later years of his training, Stephen defeated the entity Death in a test, gaining ageless immortality. Stephen later returned to New York and became its mystical guardian, defending the Earth from all manner of magical threats. During an attack by the demonic being known as Shumagorath, the Ancient One died and left Stephen the mantle of the Sorcerer Supreme. And, since then, before we get into his abilities, I just want to talk about, since then he's had various run-ins, some of his biggest villains, specifically one of the biggest villains, Dormammu, and I'm going to put an annotation right here because we did a bio on him. He's great. Dormammu, really interesting character. Strange, really, like I said, probably the most magical person. He's the biggest magical entity in the Marvel Universe, I think. Or not, he's at least the biggest magical hero. He's been in the Illuminati, and right now, if you want some good Strange reading that kind of shows you... Because he's not, even though he's a good guy, he's not really a good guy, if that makes sense. He's willing to do whatever's necessary, and he has, you speak of like selling your soul for power, selling your soul to the devil. He's done that, like literally, and so he's not completely all there. And it's a lot of it has to do with the being around dark magic and stuff like that. It's like how much of this can actually contaminate you, really. And it's sort of an interesting question to ask: is the perils of the job for Doctor Strange? So now let's move on to his abilities. Doctor Strange is, of course, gifted in magic. That's one of the prerequisites for being Sorcerer Supreme. He can teleport using spells. He is immortal due to defeating death and becoming ageless, essentially. Although he actually still just has the gray hair on his temples. I guess he didn't feel like dyeing it. But the words, Josh put this in here. I refuse to spoil it because this is from the most recent issue of New Avengers. I refuse to tell you what the words are. You can look it up for yourself. I highly suggest going to read the New Avengers run, because it is a big spoiler, Josh. I hope you're watching this. I can't tell the people that. Telekinesis. He actually can move things with his mind. That's what telekinesis is. Energy projection, as we mentioned, just spells. Offensive magic. Black magic. As I mentioned, that's sort of the dark stuff, the darker sorceries, and this is what contributes to him losing his soul a little bit. He's an expert neurosurgeon. Not sure how often that comes into play in the field, but just in case he ever was required, he could do a little brain surgery on the spot. He is an expert combatant, and that partially comes from his training with the Ancient One. Spent a lot of time in Tibet, so you'll pick up on some of that monk stuff. And he has mystical awareness. He's just connected to a lot of the other magical beings out there in the world. And so, yeah, that is pretty much Doctor Strange. As I mentioned, he's had a long and storied career in the Marvel Universe. He's not, as old as someone like Captain America, but he has been around since right around the 60s, which, as you know, pretty much is it's the cradle of civilization for comic book characters, like no matter who they are, with the exception of like Batman, Superman, and Captain America. It's just the 60s where the fertile lands. That's when you get the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, and of course Doctor Strange is no exception to that rule. He's really kind of a complex character, or he's grown to be a complex character since the 60s. He was very much like that Tony Stark archetype, as I talked about. He was sort of an asshole before being given his powers. Tony Stark doesn't have powers, but he kind of had an awakening. Doctor Strange had an awakening when he was training with the Ancient One, and he decides to rededicate his life for good rather than selfishness. And so when I say he's had his soul corrupted, it's not a selfish thing. It's like he does things for more power to help people. It's in his line of work. And it's just unfortunate that he has to, it comes to that, really, that he has to, give up his soul for more powerful. But he's been required to do that on occasion just because of his line of work. But really, he's become a pretty interesting character, pretty complex, very much like Ant-Man became a pretty complex character. He wasn't always vanilla, and Tony Stark is right now a pretty complex character with the superior Iron Man stuff going on. But definitely hope you loved this bio. Hope you love the new layout. Tell me your thoughts. Tell me your thoughts about it below. Just hit me up in the comments. So yes, what do you think about Doctor Strange? Are you excited for the movie? I personally am pumped. Cumberbatch is a great actor. He's just fantastic. I think one of the best around right now. So it'll be really interesting to see what he brings to the character. Anyways, that about wraps it up for me here. Signing off. This is CJ, and I'll see you next time.